I stood there, motionless, watching my beloved Victorian house swallowed whole by flames, every memory we ever made turning into ash before my eyes. Across the street, Karen, head of the HOA, and my infamously vicious neighbor, sipped her coffee with that smug little grin, convinced she had finally won the long, bitter war between us. But what she doesn't know is that I'm a federal judge, a person with the power to dismantle everything she's ever built, with a single ruling. The only question left is, how far is she willing to push me before I'm forced to reveal who I really am? If you're still with me, drop a comment below. I need to know you're here, and that you're ready for what comes next. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next story, and share if you've ever felt powerless in the face of rules that make no sense at all. I never imagined that returning to my childhood home, the place where my grandmother had lived her entire life, would be the beginning of a nightmare. I'm Sarah, a retired judge, fresh out of the city after a trial that shattered my faith in courtroom justice. I chose to return to the old house in a quiet suburb where morning birdsong and the scent of lavender in the garden were supposed to be enough to heal every wound in my soul. And then the first letter arrived. It was folded neatly, pressed flat, as if every millimeter of the paper reflected the personality of its sender. Karen Thompson, president of the HOA, Homeowners Association, of this area. In it, she warmly invited me to join the HOA, accompanied by a list of renovation requirements to maintain community aesthetics. Repaint your exterior in standard beige. Tear out the flower garden because it does not comply with the landscaping code ratified in 2009. The wooden wind chime on your porch creates unnecessary noise. Please remove it. I couldn't believe my eyes. This wasn't a suggestion. It was an ultimatum, dressed up in standard font and slightly embossed stationery. And more importantly, I had never signed any documents agreeing to HOA membership when I inherited the house. I wrote back, a letter that was clear, courteous, but firm. I stated plainly that the house was not part of the original HOA agreement, and that I was not obligated to comply with their new rules. I emphasized, this home is an inheritance from my ancestors, and I have every right to preserve it the way my grandmother did. Karen didn't respond with another letter, but with a smirk during a so-called casual visit. "Oh, Sarah, there've been others who thought they could remain outside this community," she said, gently smoothing the soft leather of her cream-colored gloves. "But you know, around here, those people tend to have unfortunate luck. Quite sad, really." That's when I realized I wasn't just facing an organization. I was facing power, wrapped in vague policies and carried by a woman who believed she was the law. I started installing cameras around the house, small, infrared, high-tech eyes that vanished into the night like silent sentinels. And what I began to see made my heart go colder with every passing day. Next door, the Watsons used to have a beautiful angel statue in their front yard. One night, I watched them remove it in silence. No lights, no explanation. Days later, an HOA flag was planted by their door like a quiet declaration of surrender. The house beside the Watsons belonged to a single man named Mark, someone who found joy in keeping bees in his backyard. One morning, his hives were destroyed, bees lying dead across the ground. The next day, a welcome to the HOA sign was pinned to his gate. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence. Until one Monday morning, just as I finished pouring a cup of tea, I heard the roar of a lawnmower tearing through the silence outside my window at exactly 6:12 a.m. A stranger in an unmarked uniform was mowing in razor-straight lines, honking loudly each time he turned the machine. When I ran out to ask, he simply shrugged, "Scheduled by Mrs. Thompson." The next day, I found a group of people in reflective vests standing on my front lawn, armed with laser measurers and cameras. One of them, A silver-haired woman who always wore sunglasses, likely the HOA secretary, flashed a cold smile and nodded, as if she had just uncovered evidence of a massive crime when all she had found was that my grass was 2.3 inches taller than the community standard. I couldn't help but laugh, but that laughter quickly burned into ash when the darkness came. Somewhere in the shadows, a floodlight blazed to life, beaming straight into my bedroom window like the glare of an interrogation spotlight. At first, I thought someone had parked their car in the wrong spot, but no. It was a fixed light, mounted deliberately, aimed directly from the front yard of the house across the street, the home of the HOA vice president. And it didn't turn off. Not once. All night. I tried everything, moving the bed, closing blackout curtains, wearing a sleep mask, but that light pierced through every barrier like a message carved into the night. We see you, and we won't let you sleep. Each morning, Karen returned with a new citation, each demand more absurd than the last. Trash was not taken out at the approved time. Leaky faucets are disrupting the communal landscape. Wind chimes made noise during a breeze, violation of HOA sound ordinance. Every citation was slapped onto my front door with bright red tape, like the mark of a repeat offender. I knew then. They didn't just want me to join. They wanted me to kneel, to bow my head, to admit I was wrong for resisting. But what they didn't know was that I had already begun documenting everything: cameras, copies of warnings, recordings of conversations. They thought they were cornering me, but I was only being patient and preparing a counterattack they would never see coming. My phone vibrated just as I stepped out of the courtroom. The caller ID lit up with a name I knew by heart: Emily, my loyal assistant for over 10 years. But this time, her voice wasn't calm like it always was. "Sarah, your house, it's on fire." For a few seconds, every sound around me vanished. The world went eerily silent, as if my heart had stopped beating just to replay every single word. I left the courthouse immediately, speeding home like a storm. As soon as I turned into the neighborhood, I saw it: the thick column of black smoke rising into the sky. The fire hadn't been fully put out. Ash floated through the air like whispers from the past, turning into dust. The police said it was an electrical short in the backyard lighting system. An incident, they called it. An accident. But I knew that the system had been inspected just 2 weeks ago. I knew, because I've handled dozens of house fire cases caused by technical failures. And I knew no one just accidentally has an electrical short the exact moment the security cameras are disabled, in the exact window of time when I'm away. I looked around, and then I saw them. Karen, standing on the opposite sidewalk. Her arms were crossed, her lips curved into a smile as thin and sharp as a razor blade. Beside her were 3 members of the board, the same ones who'd slapped citations onto my door like dull knives. They didn't do anything. No questions, no rushing over. They just stood there, watching. And suddenly, I understood. This wasn't just an accidental fire. This was a warning. They thought they'd burned me down, that I would panic, leave, surrender. But they forgot one thing. When a judge loses her home, she doesn't look for shelter. She looks for justice. I stood amidst the ashes, inhaling the lingering scent of smoke, silently promising myself, if they think burning down my house will make me give up, they've never known who I am. The next day, I had the camera system reinstalled. This time, more sophisticated, hidden in places no one would expect. Light fixtures, bushes, even under the border stones of the garden. A recording device was also tucked away in an old mailbox. I wasn't just documenting life anymore. I was hunting for evidence. In the darkness, I called upon people I once worked with: a retired FBI agent, a seasoned private investigator, and a well-known lawyer in the district. I was no longer the judge sitting on the high bench, but I knew the law, and I knew when justice needed a steady hand to pull back the curtain of truth. We met secretly in Emily's old shed, turning it into our own war room. They listened, observed, and slowly pieced together a grim picture behind the HOA's front facade. Karen and her crew weren't just power-hungry obsessives. They were the linchpins of an organized real estate scheme. Through systematic harassment, noise, light, warnings, even sabotage, they drove residents, especially the elderly and single people, to sell their homes at a loss in desperation. Those homes were then sold to a construction company, whose CEO was Karen's cousin. When I uncovered this, my heart turned cold. Not just because my house had been burned down, but because I wasn't the only victim. I reached out to the neighbors who had once stayed silent, who had once bowed their heads and endured. I showed them the evidence, videos, transfer documents, anonymous emails. And for the first time, I saw in their eyes no longer fear, but the hope to fight back. Karen thought she had won, but she forgot one thing. No one escapes trial when the victim is the one who once wielded the gavel of justice. After a long night spent gathering evidence, I sat in front of my computer screen in my office, my eyes fixed on the footage from the security cameras I had reinstalled. Once again, I double-checked the data from the internal cameras. Everything seemed normal, until I noticed something strange. All the footage after 2 a.m. that day had been completely deleted. This couldn't just be a coincidence. I don't believe in chance. If I had spotted an error in the system, then someone might have tampered with the data. I opened the login history from my device and stopped at one line. A login at 1:45 a.m. from Emily's device. Emily, my personal assistant. She had worked with me for over 10 years. She was someone I trusted completely, but the truth was starting to unfold. Without hesitation, I immediately traced her tracks. Phone, email, bank accounts. I checked every detail. What I discovered made my eyes go wide in disbelief. Emily had given the HOA a detailed blueprint of my house, including the locations of the security cameras and my movements for the past month. She had even provided information about key events where I would be absent, making it easier than ever to disable the cameras and sabotage my home. I felt a chill run through my body. She was no longer just an assistant. She was an insider, and not just an observer from the sidelines. She was Karen's right hand, bribed to track my every move, to manipulate my reactions from the shadows. Every day, I thought I was the one in control. But now I understood that Emily had been working with the HOA for a long time, reporting every one of my actions, steering my steps. I couldn't even fathom it. She had done all of this for money, for power. But what Emily didn't know was that I would never be easily defeated, and I would never forgive those who dared betray me. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. The accidents that the residents in the neighborhood had experienced before were no longer coincidences. I began to analyze all the incidents again. The homes that refused to join the HOA were meticulously harassed, windows smashed, walls spray-painted, trees cut down. And then, after that, fires or strange, unexplainable accidents occurred. They all had one thing in common. They refused to join the HOA. I shuddered at the thought. Karen and her group weren't just targeting me. They had a plan all along to slowly force each resident to sell their house at a cheap price and submit to their manipulation. I decided not to hesitate any longer. The evidence had to be clear, undeniable. One evening, while reviewing the security camera footage, I stumbled upon an unexpected clip, a key moment. The surveillance camera in the parking lot outside my house caught an image of Karen and Emily sitting in a car, talking quite intensely. Neither of them realized that the camera had captured everything. I watched as Karen handed Emily a thick envelope, seemingly containing money and a small USB drive. They looked around as if fearing they were being watched, before quickly driving off. I knew I had to act immediately. This footage, along with the documents I had gathered, was the evidence that could expose them. But just as I decided to begin compiling the evidence, something happened that I didn't expect. Emily suddenly disappeared. She didn't show up for work, no calls, no messages. After I began to suspect, she severed all contact, as if she had completed her mission. I couldn't believe it. She might have disappeared, but she couldn't easily escape what she had done. A sense of unease engulfed me, but I didn't stop. I became even more determined. They thought I would give up, but now I had everything I needed to bring them down. That day, I stood in the bright, blinding lights of the HOA meeting room for the final time. But this time, I was no longer just another participant. I was the judge, and I would not let them escape justice. As I walked in, I wore the judge's robe. This robe wasn't just to cover my body, but to conceal every ounce of uncertainty I had ever felt. I was accompanied by the FBI and a team of investigators, people I had contacted long ago. I had irrefutable evidence in my hands. Every eye in the room turned toward me as I entered the meeting room, where Karen and the HOA members were waiting, confident they could continue manipulating this community without fear. But not today. Today, I was going to be the one to change everything. Silently, I began to present the evidence. I opened my laptop and played the video recordings of the secret meetings between Karen and Emily, followed by the audio recordings of their scheming conversations. The strange financial transactions I had uncovered, proving that the HOA had taken money from real estate investors to push the residents out of the neighborhood. I even had testimony from the former HOA treasurer, who had been threatened and forced to work for them, but had finally found the courage to stand on the side of justice. Each piece of evidence I presented was like a knife cutting through their arrogance. Karen and her accomplices could do nothing but stand still, helpless, as each piece of evidence fell like a heavy rain. And then, I delivered the key point. Emily, my assistant, was not just a traitor, but the one who had led them all. She was being hunted by the police, and soon after, she was arrested. As Emily was escorted into the room, the panic on Karen's face was undeniable. But it wasn't over. I looked at Karen as she collapsed before me. Her eyes were full of despair, and then something I couldn't believe happened. Karen's husband stood up. He could no longer bear the guilt, unable to continue hiding the truth. He spoke up, confirming every charge Karen was accused of, then turned his back, quietly walked out, and betrayed his wife. "I can't live this lie anymore," he said, then left without another word of explanation. Looking at those who had once made me live in fear, I felt only one thing. Justice had finally prevailed. Not only had I reclaimed my home, but I had also brought all these guilty individuals into the light. When the final verdict was delivered, I could hardly believe my eyes. Karen was sentenced to 30 years in prison, a just sentence for the crime she and her accomplices had committed. Those who had harassed me, who had destroyed the lives of countless other families, now faced the enormous consequences of their actions. The other members of the HOA were not spared either. Each one had to pay for the crimes they committed, from manipulating residents to attempting to destroy the community's values. That day, I stood in the courthouse, my eyes no longer filled with fear, no longer tense. I knew at last justice had prevailed. After winning the case, I set about rebuilding my home, the Victorian house my grandmother had left me. I didn't change much, only restored the purple accents she had carefully designed. Every corner of the house reminded me of family, of love, and of the legacy she had built. But the house wasn't just a physical structure. It was a symbol of restoration, the rebirth of myself, and of the community that had been torn apart. The community was no longer under the dark shadow of the HOA board. The people were free, no longer living under the ruthless control of the past. Everything now breathed. It was peaceful, without the fear of being violated. I kept a few mementos from this battle. Karen's coffee mug, the one she always used when secretly discussing her plans, and Emily's USB drive, which contained the highly sensitive information she had provided to the HOA. These weren't worthless objects, they were symbols of an important lesson. Justice begins with the closest betrayal. So, there it is. I won, and I will not let anyone forget this lesson. If you feel this story has inspired you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to my channel to follow the next stories. Together, we will explore more lessons about fighting, justice, and restoration. See you in the next video.